Hi friends, I'm Jeffy G. I recently downloaded Drambo for iOS music production, and I've been dabbling around with different apps on my iPad for probably 2 years. But this app is really good. It's actually the most capable GrooveBox I've seen so far. And I'm kind of late to the game, a little bit embarrassed about that. Drambo has been around for 2 years, and here I am just starting to learn how to use it now. What stands out for me is that Drambo has the ability to create a complete song. A lot of GrooveBox apps only go so far in the song creation process, but Drambo seems to take it a step further. And when you have those capabilities all built into one product, the line between a GrooveBox and a DAW becomes a bit blurred. When you first investigate Drambo, it's marketed as a modular GrooveBox and sound design tool. And certainly the rack capabilities at the top are the thing that stand out as being unique. You can create your own synthesizers, you can include samplers, you can pull in AUV3 plugins. It's extremely flexible in terms of managing the sources of sounds that you're going to use in your music creation process. But for me, that wasn't really the differentiator. I've seen similar capabilities in other products, although Drambo really does take it a step further in making it easier, because I'm instantly intimidated by anything called modular. I don't know enough about synthesis and LFOs and oscillators to make great use of that. But the composition capabilities that are built into the product are really good. The sequencer is excellent, the grid pattern for launching clips is excellent, and I'll show you more of what I'm getting at here about that line between a GrooveBox and a DAW.
What I'm liking about Drambo is the way this one screen is organized into 3 parts. You've got down below here your keyboard. You can see you can resize this, and it can be keyboard or pads. Up top, you've got the area for creating your modular instruments or what's going to be on each track. And there's considerable flexibility on how you position that. For example, right now, you're seeing it as a mixer, but depending on the instrument you choose or the track you choose, it can be different things. In these cases, I've got free sampler, just playing a sample. And then in other cases, I've got an instrument, which was a AUV3 instrument that I was able to add. But perhaps the most useful section for me that I think differentiates Drambo is this middle section right here. And this is the sequencer pattern grid. So in any one of these cells, you can view your typical sequencer, and down here, you can view all the components of it. You know, the piano roll look that you're familiar with, and that's for creating sequences all in one. So you don't need a separate sequencer program. But then each cell in this grid can be organized into a song, and they can have timing. So for example, this song is going to play that first row of instruments based on the timings I've set up, because I've got this timing thing turned on. So if I play it, and then it'll go to the next row. As you can see, there's all these options on how that is executed. So each row in the grid can have a name. It could be intro, verse, chorus, a number of repeats, which is really handy. I want the verse to repeat twice or 4 times or whatever. I want that section many times. And you can insert, duplicate, copy, paste, remove any part of this grid. And that makes this very DAW-like. This is maybe the best feature I've seen in a GrooveBox for creating a complete song, which is usually missing from other products. Down below you can add more to the grid. If you select a grid and click on this one, it'll duplicate the grid. Compare that to another GrooveBox app. This is the Amplify app called GrooveBox, which was one of the first iPad GrooveBox music apps that I tried, and it's pretty good. There's nothing wrong with it, but essentially you can create different instruments. It comes with a possible 5 or 6 instruments, I think. In any given instrument, it has a sequencer. But where this product tends to fall flat is when you try to create a song. So you've got all these individual parts. You've created drum beats, bass lines, polysynths, and you've done all your sequencing. Then they give you this type of grid. It looks very familiar, similar to what you see in Drambo. Except here's the problem. When you go to play a section, there's no way to control moving from one section to the next other than clicking on it. So if I click on play, it's playing that first row, which is just playing the first 2 instruments. But to go to another row, I have to click on it. So in the next example, what I have to do is I have to manually pick which row I want it to play. What a shame, that the fact that you cannot create a complete song in this environment because it's a nice GrooveBox, but without that feature of creating a complete song, really it's sequencing all the patterns into some performable row. Well, now I'm stuck. I basically, with this particular tool, I have to move all those samples into another product, like a DAW. Another thing that I found interesting with Drambo is that I have songs that are entirely sample-based, or ideas for songs that are sample-based. So I had to learn how to use this flexi sampler, and it is a bit more complex than it first appears. You would expect, okay, I can edit this sample, and I can decide how long it's going to play. See, that's just hi-hats. And then it has different modes. One-shot mode, a loop mode, slice mode. I mean, everything's there that you're looking for. Pitch, speed, the fade in, fade out, velocity, where the loop starts and ends. Everything is built into that little area, and it takes a little while to get used to that. And the other thing I noticed is down in this area here, where you're deciding on your sequence, there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. If you select it, you've got a bunch of options here for copy, paste, delete, clear, and crop. And then the button at the end, I push that. The length, setting the number of steps and the speed of those steps takes some playing around to get used to. It's smart, and the way it's organized is very flexible, but it took me a little while to get used to it, especially playing samples. When I first brought samples into this, the flexi sample would only play, the first 4 beats of my sample instead of the whole thing. You see this example where I've got a guitar sample. It's only playing half of the sample. And that's because the length of that sample is more than I've set up the clip. So for example, here I've got the clip length to be 64 steps, but the length of that sample is longer than that. So I can either double it to 128 or change the speed with which it's played. Essentially, Drambo is flexible, but it doesn't automatically shape your samples to fit into the length of the sequencer. You're responsible for understanding how long your loops are, how long you want them to play, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, you're not limited to samples. On this same one, I could have easily added an instrument if I liked, and it's kind of the other approach. But these are the things I typically do in a GrooveBox. Either I start a song based on samples, and then I might add instruments later. So in this case, I'm going to add an instrument, and I'm going to choose hammerhead. I expand the view, and I can load a preset. When you're new to any music app for iOS, the first thing you wonder is there a manual? How am I going to learn this thing? What you'll find is that there are some great templates that come with this. So, you can pick a factory song, and you can load that and listen to it. And most importantly, you can see what's going on in these examples. So once again, I'm drawn to the middle section that has this basically song mode where you can see all of the individual cells in the grid and what they do. All of the bits and pieces that you see and how to edit them are there, which is really cool. Great for learning how this works. And then you can go through the individual bits and say, okay, here's a modular synth that's been created on this track, and here's another one. Here's the FM operator for an FM bass. Here they're using a delivered kick, snare, hats. You can get a larger view of what's included in that top line. There's just quite a bit there to scroll through. But each one of these is kind of a learning experience. So for example, I can look here at the open hat and say, okay, here's how the hi-hats are programmed, and there's a compressor stuck at the end of that. What role does that compressor play? I can turn it off and on, hear the sound differences, play around with the parameters, and that's a great way to learn. Then beyond the songs, there are these templates that you can open up for some complex topics. Polymono processing is very well documented. You can see they've gone to great lengths to explain every component of these polyphony to mono conversion activity. There's text boxes in here, and each component, whether it's a reverb or an oscillator and a filter, this is turns out to be a great way to learn. Just prior to getting Drambo, and I'll admit I'm fairly new to it, I was using AUM quite a bit. I like AUM. I think it's a wonderful tool. It's based on this mixer metaphor, but it's far more powerful than how it first appears. But what about creating a song? Well, I was using Helium by 4 Pockets as my sequencer. And so in Helium, you can have up to 16 MIDI tracks. On track 1, you can have these patterns. And then on track 2, you can have these patterns. And track 3, you can have another. And as a sequencer, Helium is very flexible. It's got some wonderful features. It does have a MIDI mixer built in, which, in some cases, more useful than what's in AUM. So what you end up with is, this scenario. And each one of these instruments can have a track source from within Helium. You can pick, I want this track to play the sequence in track 1 and another one to play in track 3 and 4 and so on and so on. So with 16 different tracks available within Helium, you could program out your entire song. It's not bad. In fact, I found that the 4 Pockets Helium product was perhaps the greatest sequencer for creating a song. But most of what I had seen from people using Helium is that they create 4, 8, 16 bar type patterns without building out a full song with its component parts. There's nothing in AUM inherently for building a song. You're going to need other sequencer and MIDI source and MIDI generation in order to build songs in AUM. One other thing to keep in mind is that all of the templates, the sample songs, and the tutorials that come delivered in Drambo make use of the delivered generative instruments. So when you click on plus here, you'll always find everything down in the oscillator, sampler, processing, modulator, all of these features that are built into Drambo. But you won't find any external AU3 instruments built into the demos. That's really going to depend on what AUV3 instruments you already have or have downloaded. And when you do click on the audio units, you're going to see everything that you own. And at first, I thought, well, will I use the modular capabilities of that top row? Will that be important to me? And I was thinking no, but the more I've played around with this, the more impressed I am. I'm just a little bit intimidated. But the good thing about these tutorials and everything being included is you can listen to it and then you can learn something from it.
Now, I'm not an expert with Drambo yet, but my first impressions are great, and I've got a lot to learn. There's probably some people out there like me that are late to the game and are just learning Drambo now. Hopefully you'll get some value out of this video. If you'd like to see more, subscribe to the channel, click on the like button. I'll be doing some other videos on Drambo, but I'll try not to duplicate what's already out there on YouTube as far as tutorials and learning how to use the product. But as I find some unique uses, I'll make sure everybody gets to see what I'm doing with it. Thanks for watching.